Are the Gators ready to take down Georgia in the SEC Eastern Division? Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football, talking Florida football for the next hour. And the very best possible way to do so is to bring in these two. So if you watch my channel on a regular basis, you see David Waters from Gators Breakdown and, of course, Jackie Franchuli from Gators Territory of Rivals on a regular basis, and they do an outstanding job of covering Florida football. How you doing tonight?
Great. Thanks for having me, Mark.
Doing great.
Thanks for jumping on board.
It's kind of been it's kind of been a Gators Breakdown, Gators Territory thing this week. I had Corey on the podcast this week too. So Jackie is, of course, working with him and very familiar with Corey. So it's crossing paths a lot this week.
So for anybody on the line right now, if you're not familiar with these two, and even if you're not a Florida fan, if you're a college football junkie, which obviously we speak to all the time, we're here for the hardcore college football nerds, then you want to lock into what they have to say about Florida football. Obviously, as a major player in the SEC and across the nation, you can catch David on all the major audio platforms, on Gators Breakdown, and right here on YouTube as well. And again, Jackie joins us from Rivals Gators Territory. This is Dan Mullen's program, and this is certainly, as I've discussed with both of you, just one of the great fits in college football, and we thought it was going to be, and it's turned out to be exactly that for the first two seasons. I was just reviewing the decade in regards to teams that have been the most over-evaluated in the preseason AP rankings versus the ones that have been the most undervalued and then overachieved. And Dan Mullen's first edition there at Florida came up as one of the very few teams that were unranked in the preseason and finished in the top 10 in the final AP rankings. And then what I saw from an outsider's perspective was a team last year that didn't get blown out by Georgia in the fourth quarter. And again, I emphasize the fourth quarter the previous season, that stayed within a touchdown, that erased those ugly marginal losses that they suffered against a Missouri the season before. And then, of course, capped it off with another New Year's Six bowl victory, and this time 11 wins in the regular season. So, Jackie, we'll kick it to you first in regards to where this program stands and how close to the elite that we keep hearing Alabama, Clemson, Ohio State seem to be the first programs that roll off of people's mouths. How close Florida is under Dan Mullen?
Sure. I think one can definitely argue that they're on the right track. I think if anyone says they're not on the right track, is being disingenuous. When you look at what Florida has been able to do the last 2 years, especially what Dan Mullen and his coaching staff has been able to do, just look at the results they had last season. And I'm just saying that they've been able to win 11 games that year, but also with so many injuries and so many scholarship players unavailable. During one part of the season, they only had 64 scholarship athletes available to play. But Dan Mullen was able to secure 11 wins and go to a New York Six Bowl. They were able to hang against the national champions, LSU, at night at Death Valley when Georgia got steamrolled in the SEC championship game. You can see what Dan Mullen and his staff has been able to do with the talent that they've had in a situation where former coaches at Florida didn't provide them with depth at certain positions because there was a scholarship imbalance when Dan Mullen and his staff came on board. And that's what they started correcting during the recruiting process. I know people are going to focus on DeMarcus Bowman, did not stay in state. I've heard it all before. But if you look at the scholarship chart, they've been able to really bring balance to certain positions, like on the defensive line, like on the O-line. And that's what's going to help this team move forward, because you don't want to keep rehashing those. You want to create depth. You want to create experience. And that's what Dan Mullen and his staff has been doing. Now, they still need to make sure you keep those big in-state athletes home, like the Bowmans. But they started doing that. Derek Wingo was able to stay home. Gervin Dexter chose to come. So they're on the right track. So to say that they're too far from Georgia would be completely ignoring the facts. They are closer. Don't get me wrong. Georgia is still a powerhouse on the recruiting trail. They still need to beat Kirby Smart in that regard. But if you had to put Kirby and Dan Mullen as far as coaching, you saw what can happen when Dan Mullen has his weapons available. And Kirby had his weapons available and still was not able to accomplish what they're hoping to in Athens. So I think when you look at Florida, they're a program that's in the right direction.
What do you think, David?
Yeah, and I think you go and look at Mullen's first year and the second year, and he's been able to do it in a couple of different ways. You go and look at year one, you got to figure everything out. This is year one. You got to figure out, as Jackie was saying, what do you have left over from Jim McElwain? What did he leave you? Bring all those pieces together and go figure out something. You had the disappointing loss to Kentucky early in the season. You were able to rebound, give Georgia a run for their money. Had a disappointing loss to Missouri, but able to bounce back from that as well, all while transforming Felipe Franks along the way and that becoming 10 wins. And then year two, Felipe Franks goes down early in the season, and you had to do it a way where you knew you were deep at receiver. Kyle Trask comes in, saves the day against Kentucky, and they're able just to use that as a launching pad for a whole completely different looking offense. You know, Florida, for lack of a better term, I won't necessarily call it that, but you could call Florida an air raid team last year because they couldn't run the ball. The run blocking wasn't there. You know, as good as LaMichael Piron was, he just never really got the opportunity to show the skill set that he has, and Florida became a passing team. And so Mullen knew he was deep at receiver, had a quarterback that could get him the ball, so deep there, and took advantage. Unearthed a weapon in Kyle Pitts where he was, you go, and Jackie and I can go back, he was that guy everybody was labeling as that breakout player, but we didn't see it until, you know, the season started going on, and you had that trip to Baton Rouge, and he goes crazy there, and it just continued all in the season. So I think, as Jackie said as well, overcoming the injuries, changing the offense completely, and still having that success to go win 11 games. And then recruiting is getting better. He is building the roster. He's building the roster in the mold that he wants it. And yeah, you go back to last year's class, and a lot of those guys didn't stick around, and so many guys were never even played a down for Florida. But to bounce back this year and get so many integral pieces in this class, and definitely in the trenches, I'm a big believer you got to sign a quarterback every class, and this quarterback here that they have in Anthony Richardson probably is in that prototypical mold that everybody's looking for with a Dan Mullen quarterback, and they got him. So the future's looking bright as well. But yeah, as we've already brought it up, it was you going into year one. All right, you figure it out, go have some success, more success than probably thought. In year two, it was all right, go out there and beat the teams you're supposed to beat. Florida did that. In year three, it's finally going over there and getting over that hurdle of beating Georgia.
We've got college football fans from just about every fan base in the live chat, and they jump in all these live streams. So bring it on. But we're talking all Florida football here for the next hour with David Waters from Gators Breakdown, Jackie Franchuli from Gators Territory. And just to segue into what David was already talking about regarding Anthony Richardson, to grind it down a little bit further, your thoughts about him as a passer, accuracy and arm strength, and just his evaluation.
Well, I got to know his quarterback coach, Denny Thompson, pretty well here in Jacksonville. Denny was the quarterback trainer for Carson Beck, who also went to Georgia, and Sims, who ended up going to Georgia Tech. It was committed to FSU for a while, ended up going to Georgia Tech. Well, Denny was here in Jacksonville training all three of those guys, and they all go to three big Power 5 schools there. So Anthony Richardson really improved from his junior year to his senior year before he was injured in his senior year. Really improved with working with Denny over the summer and become a completely different looking quarterback than he was the year before. He didn't necessarily have to rely on his legs too much. And this is a lot with a lot of big time 4-star, 5-star quarterbacks get to play with a whole lot of 4-star talent around them a lot of the time. Anthony Richardson doesn't get that luxury there playing there in Gainesville. So he is the weapon of the team. He was that team. And before he injured, showed that he could really become a better passer. So, when you take that step up to college, there's still another step that you have to take. But Dan Mullen's reputation is, hey, you're not going to go out there and thrust a true freshman into a role before he's ready. So he'll get time to get seasoned, plenty of experience in the offense before Dan Mullen has to throw him out there. But he is a true dual threat. I don't think and that's not a negative thrown on him. He can run and he can pass. He is a true dual threat.
Yeah, and just to kind of bounce off of that, when you were talking about true threat, I think he's a prototypical Dan Mullen quarterback. I think it's one of the first times I think I can say Anthony Richardson is a quarterback that Dan Mullen wanted in Gainesville. That's the quarterback that he recruited and he really wanted to come. And actually, just around week and a half ago, I was talking to a few people close to the program, and I can tell you 4 or 5 people, I was calling them in unrelated situations. I was calling about something completely different. And they brought up Anthony Richardson in the conversation. They were saying, you know, he is the dude. I'm quoting here. They're saying he's the dude. They're saying that this is a guy that is impressing by his work ethic. He's putting a lot of work. A lot of the players, I've been told, have been really impressed with the skill level that he's been bringing. Now, obviously, you're not saying he's going to be a star on day one or even, you know, his second year. They're saying that this guy to this program. That's something that I've heard consistently since his arrival in December when, you know, he started practicing with the team. A lot of the guys are very impressed with what he's been able to do. And that's just the beginning. He's just scratching the surface. You know, like we're saying, he still has a lot of time to work with Brian Johnson and Dan Mullen just to get better as a passer, but he's got the raw talent there. And he's already shown that he's capable of improving when he has capable instruction. So it's very exciting to see and hear what we're hearing already about Richardson. And I know I'm excited to see him at spring practice just to get a little bit of a glimpse with him when he does have some really talented wide receivers to throw the ball to.
So I'm not seeing running backs on the 2020 list. And David was talking about issues in the running game this past season where it turned into like a 70-30 type run-pass ratio in regards to effective plays for Florida, especially in the second half of the season. J-Jobs is asking about Florida recruiting effective running backs in this 2020 class.
Yeah, well, obviously I mentioned Bowman a few times. I know people are always talking about DeMarcus Bowman. That was a big loss. But I think what people, you know, when you look at the rankings, you don't actually add Lorenzo Lingard. That was a big-time transfer from Miami that came in. So they did pick up a running back, and that was a really good running back, a former 5-star. Now, the only thing that Dan Mullen is hoping that he can get a waiver now. He wanted to move closer to be family due to health concerns in his family. So you would think that the NCAA will say, yes, you can be eligible, but the NCAA is very unreliable in their decisions. You just look at Virginia Tech and, you know, their situation with Brock Huffman, who was denied his NCAA waiver when he moved closer to his mother because her house was 51 miles or 101 miles. I can't remember one of the miles, but it was like literally 1 mile too far from the requirements that the NCAA said that they needed him to be as close to his mom, who had a brain tumor. So
there's
again,
the NCAA for you. We can't. Okay, it's good to have rules, and then we can look at the rules and look at it within context, and then make it a reasonable decision. Okay.
Exactly. Yeah. So they're hoping, and they think they'll be able to get a waiver. So they did pick up a very talented running back. I know there's a lot of disappointments about not getting Bowman. I understand. But, you know, there's still one running back out there. You know, he's visiting in March, Zack Evans. So he's visiting. So you know what? So there might be an extra running back in this class after all. So I think we should hold up our judgment until his decision is made. Now, because he signed an NLI previously, he doesn't actually have to sign any letter of intent. He can just show up during the summer. So it's going to be an interesting month or so for Florida. That's a big official visit weekend for them because they also have Leonard Manuel on campus. Now he's changed his official visit date a number of times, but that's a big, you know, weekend for Florida, and maybe the running back recruiting will pick up. But I think it's unfair to knock the running backs in the run game from last year when you think of all the situations around them, when you think the offensive line was doing a poor job blocking for them. And then honestly, I kept reiterating this during the season, Keontae Lewis was such a big miss in the running game. I think a lot of people undervalued his value, I think, because when you look back 2 years ago, the guy wasn't the best pass catcher as a tight end, but he was a great blocker, especially in the run game. So and sometimes when Dan Mullen used to run those 2 back sets, Jordan Scarlett provided nice blocking for LaMichael Pirine as well. Those are the guys that were missing, those extra guys. And I think Malik Davis did not provide that extra little thing that Jordan Scarlett did. I think Dameon Pierce will be a guy that can offer that. But I think a lot of people focused on LaMichael Pirine and what he didn't do on the ground game and forget what he did do. And they always try to put all the stuff on the running backs when, you know, Kyle Pitts, great pass catcher, needs to do a better job blocking. Keon Zipper, I think he has a lot of potential to be a good blocker for Florida. He also is just a freshman last year. He needs to get a little bit better. So I think once, a lot of these tight ends become all around tight ends, which is something, they really, really wanted to focus on this last year, and the O-line issues get resolved, obviously we're going to take a look at Josh Braun. He's one of the early enrollees, see how far he along, he's a true freshman, but I'm really curious to see if he can provide more athleticism inside at guard, and maybe we can see a shuffle of Garage at left tackle and Stone Forsythe at right. Maybe that could be something that John Hevesy does. So those are the type of questions that we're going to be seeing answered during the spring. So I always defend the running backs, because I think a lot of people put too much negativity on the running backs when there was a team situation for why the ground game wasn't working last year.
Yeah, the hope is, the Virginia bowl game was a look ahead to this season, because Florida ran the ball well in that game. The offensive line looked good. You actually did see Kyle Pitts doing some, having some success in the blocking game as a tight end that we didn't see in the season. And Michael Pirine busting long runs. So yeah, he's no longer here. But you hope the offensive line consistency you saw in that game and the big runs from the running back position hopefully does translate. But as Jackie said, Dameon Pierce really looks to be the only proven running back that they have. Malik Davis hasn't really been able to build off that 2017 season. We haven't seen enough of Iverson Clement or Naquan Wright to really say what they're going to be right now. So, if Lorenzo Lingard does come in and get that immediate eligibility, and Zack Evans commits to Florida and is playing, so you add 2 5-star running backs in there that will be on the roster in August when fall camp starts, and it could look completely different than what it did looked like last year with a more experienced offensive line. So I'm on the side of Jackie too. It was really hard to really down these running backs, engage these running backs on an offensive line last year that was being retooled and replacing so many parts. And because we know what Michael Pirine provided the year before, and the only thing that really changed was the quarterback position going from Felipe Franks and Kyle Trask. But that really wasn't a determining factor as far as when you look at the offensive line, and that's what really held the running game back. But it will be interesting to see when we hear the Zack Evans news. As Jackie said, he'll be visiting in March. Will he commit soon after, and we still kind of have to play the waiting game until he enrolls, or will he wait till the summer and commit right before he enrolls somewhere? And we'll have to hear about this drama for 2 more months. So that's I know. And no fault of the kid there. We have there's a lot of things that are going on behind the scenes, and why he's in this situation to begin with. So we'll see if he puts it all in a hush coming up soon. It looks a Florida, Ole Miss, Tennessee battle for right now, and we'll see where that goes. But I know on the Florida end, especially with Tim Brewster now being recently hired and him taking over that Zack Evans recruitment, I can't speak enough to how big that hire was for Florida. And also now kind of on the tail end of this recruitment, him taking over that recruitment, having a previous history with Zack Evans, and that may just be what seals it for the Gators.
Oh man, Brewster on the staff has been incredible. I've just been following him on social media and how really active he is on there. The man travels with a Gators helmet and puts it everywhere in the middle of the lounge in the airport and just starts, I want to say, pimping up the school. So it's been nice to see him and the type of changes he's already been doing.
Now, I don't want to misidentify a player, certainly, but Zack Evans has had off-the-field issues. He has that history, correct?
There is a rumor of punching or hitting a coach in a playoff game in Texas, I believe. So I think that's the history. That's all I know. I don't know if there's any more. I know he's already graduated high school, so yeah, he's
no grade issues.
Right? Yeah, no grade issues, anything like that. So the only thing I know is maybe that one incident, sent his national letter of intent to Georgia. Georgia didn't accept it for whatever reason. So. I know he got really close with Jervon Dexter at the All-Star game there, and he's probably the one Florida player that's kind of maybe behind the scenes helping recruiting Zack Evans. But it's hey, look, I've seen follow social media, and a lot of people say, is it worth the headache to have to go through this? Well, I mean, there was a certain 5-star player named Percy Harvin who had a lot of these same reputation coming into Florida, and that worked out pretty well for the player he ultimately becomes. So, I hate judging a 17-year-old kid on one mistake that may or may not be overblown. I don't really know the whole details. That's just what's out there.
Yeah, that's I've heard the same thing, and honestly, I think Dan Mullen has proven that he likes to give a kid a second chance. I think that's something that Mullen has said a number of times. And he's a very, very talented kid. And again, no grade issues. So that's not the reason why he didn't get into Georgia. So I think that was another rumor that's been circling around Twitter, on social media, that it's just not accurate.
Talking Florida football here at Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. So please leave your comments and questions in the live chat. And we're looking ahead to Florida spring practice on March 16th. So between the two of you, what would emerge, do you believe, as the storylines of what are the crucial units on both sides of the ball that need to have a nice spring? Any particular players that need to step up for you, David?
I'll just go back to basically what I was saying for running back. I think Iverson Clement, Naquan Wright, Malik Davis, those guys need to have big springs, especially if Lorenzo Lingard, Zack Evans are coming along. Then, those guys need to have big springs to kind of shy away what may happen in the fall if those two guys get eligible. They need to prove their worth in the spring and really get ahead there. But also the receiver position. Florida's replacing so many guys there. You're losing Swain, Hammond, Cleveland, Jefferson, and bring back Grimes, Tony. We'll throw Kyle Pitts in there too, just for that sake of being a receiver. Florida's got they got a lot to figure out on offense. They do get the offensive line back. Only really have to replace one key cog there, so maybe experience does come a long way from last year to this year. But when you talk about replacing how many receivers that Florida has to replace that receiver, how does that affect Kyle Trask or Emory Jones as the quarterback? Florida went so deep at receiver. Those guys knew where to be. They knew the offense. They knew what to expect, and they really had a rapport with what Kyle Trask was trying to do last year. How does that affect him coming up this year? We're having to replace so many wide receivers as well. So there's a lot of, I think, confidence in the Florida offense based off of last year and figuring out. And plus, Dan Mullen's track history. You had just kind of have to track it up right now. He'll figure it out. There'll be things that he'll figure out along the way. Nobody thought when Felipe Franks went down that the offense would kind of just take off and get a little more wide open after that. So it's going to be I think spring's going to be really important for just a lot of guys. The top guys that you probably will be able to count on: Kyle Trask, Trevon Grimes, Kadarius Toney, Damian Pierce. But after that, there's a lot of question marks of guys that can really raise their stock in spring.
Yeah, I kind of agree with everything you just said, David. I think when I look at the run game, that's my big question mark on offense, is because if you want to be successful in the SEC, I know last year Mullen and the Gators were able to do it with that kind of air raid offense. But I think if you want to take the next step, you do need to establish a run game. But I think my question goes on the O-line a lot more, because I want to see what Hevesy has planned. Everyone knows that they struggled on that right side with John DeLance. So what are they going to do? Are they going to keep the same system where, we bring Brett Heggie at center, and then we keep Stone Farside on left tackle, then we keep Garage at guard and Ethan White at guard? Or, like I said, if Josh Braun is this guy that can step up just as a true freshman, maybe they kind of change that up a little bit, like I said earlier, and make it more athletic inside by moving, Garage to left and Forsythe to right. So that's something that I want to see in that O-line. But I think defensively, there's a lot of questions when you lose an alpha dog like John Grenard. You lose that leader on defense, and that's something that Dan Mullen was stressing so much since he arrived in Gainesville, that he wanted an alpha dog. He wanted a guy, remember that Missouri press conference saying that you want thumb wrestle you and he wants to beat you. And that's the sort of thing that Grenard did. He inspired that defense. That voice is a huge miss. I know statistically he was a great pass rusher, but just his voice, his character, that's the intangibles. That's what's going to be missing on that defense. Who is going to step up? The other question I have is at star. A lot of talk was centered around Avante Williams coming to Florida when he was trending towards the Gators. Now, obviously, he chose Miami over Florida on National Signing Day. And I think we're going to see Amari Burney possibly shift away from linebacker, where they have nice depth there, especially with guys like Tyron Hopper, who's a redshirt freshman, now able in the depth. You got James Houston, Ventrell Miller, two veteran guys there as well. And you can have Mahmoud Diabate that could possibly slide to linebacker as well. So I think when you have that depth at linebacker, you can move move Amari Burney to star, which he played under Chauncey Gardner-Johnson during his freshman season. And then you can actually expect maybe Chester Kimbrough to be a guy who would back up Amari Burney. I've heard a lot of good things about Kimbrough, and actually Van Jefferson during last fall camp was all about Kimbrough. He was talking about Kimbrough. I would ask him about a freshman DB, and he would bring up Kimbrough right away, not Kerry Earlham. He would bring up Chester Kimbrough as a guy that has impressed him the most. So I think the star position is what I want to see, because that's a position that they really struggled last year, especially, when you look back against that Georgia game. Georgia attacked Trey Dean. They've noticed the weakness, and they attacked Trey Dean. So if they were able to have that position fixed and were solid for Amari Burney and were really content with Chester Kimbrough there, I think the defense will look better. And obviously the safety question, is that safety rotation going to come back? Are they going to be rotating guys? Are they going to rotate Sean Davis? Are they going to rotate in Donovan Steiner? And where does Jaden Hill fit in the cornerback room? And obviously Marco Wilson is starting, and then Kyler Elam. How does Jaden Hill work? Is he okay? I've heard great things about him in the offseason, but is he ready to take the next step? I had someone tell me when he arrived on campus alongside Chris Steele and saying, you know what, Chris Steele might be a 5-star, but I'm more excited about Jaden Hill. So I want to see how far he's developed. So I'm more curious about the secondaries on the defensive side, and to see who's the voice of that defense. Will it be Kyrie Campbell? He's got the personality for it. So will Kyrie Campbell be that voice of the defense, replacing Grenard?
Yeah, that's one guy I'm looking at there. I think Kyrie Campbell's that one voice I'm looking for. And Jackie, you brought it up with the defensive end and trying to replace Jonathan Grenard. Look, this is going to be the first time we get to see Brenton Cox in a Gator uniform, the transfer from Georgia last year, the 5-star transfer. And look, Grantham's had success going back to Ja'Kai Polite 2 years ago and finding a sack master. He found a sack master last year too, with the combination of Zuniga and Grenard. And you go back into, hey, look, maybe your name just needs to start with J. Because you go back to Jarvis Jones and Todd Grantham back in his days at Georgia. You had Ja'Kai Polite, Jonathan Grenard. But, Brenton Cox is going to be that guy I think they look at to replace some of that sack production. Florida had 49 sacks last year. Almost 50 sacks on the year. And then Brenton Cox is going to be looked at as that transfer from Georgia to live up to that 5-star billing and be that next guy that tallies up a whole lot of sacks. So just coming up spring, Mark, you're talking about guys to look out for. This will be the first time we get to see him in a Gator uniform since he transferred from Georgia last August.
I know we're only talking about spring, but I'm just waiting for Derek Wingo to get on campus. That throws everything out of whack, because that kid is such a versatile guy. He can play linebacker, he can be a pass rusher. I'm interested to see how kind of fits in, because I'm expecting an immediate impact from a guy like Derek Wingo. You can't have that kid sitting down. We hear Dan Mullen say he wants to play the blessed playmakers. Well, Derek Wingo is one of your best playmakers, so I'm curious to see how he does. I know we're talking about spring, but yeah, it's just an interesting little extra to think about when the fall season starts.
Well, you mentioned some of the issues with Trey Dean and some of the more veteran replacements, but I'm looking at the top of the early enrollee board, and I see Jahari Rogers and Ethan Pouncey. Now, I'm guessing Pouncey, that's a legacy player right there.
Yeah.
The other Pounceys?
Yes, he is.
Okay.
Yeah, he was a cousin. And Jordan Pouncey, the wide receiver transfer as well. That's his big brother. So there's a lot of Pounceys back on the floor. There's 2 Pounceys back on the Florida roster again. And Dan Mullen's the head coach. I think it's a lot of people are going down memory lane right now.
So these 2 kids are already obviously on campus, already in the weight room and in the weight and conditioning program. So they could be a factor right out of the gate.
Yeah, for sure. I think Ethan Pouncey could be argued as one of the guys that could maybe make it onto the depth chart in the 2 deep. I could see Ethan on the other side of corner, maybe backing up, Marco Wilson. I could see that. I think he has a potential. I think obviously when you look at a freshman, you always have to consider yourself, like, how is he going to react to the speed of the game, and how is he going to react to that first spring practice? But he's a name to watch. And I think Rashad Torrance is another guy that is such a very talented guy. He's a safety that committed to them too, and is on campus too. Is another guy to watch as far as early enrollees in that DB unit. Yeah,
early enrollees, and I think it can't be overstated. Jackie's already brought him up, but Josh Braun is on campus, offensive lineman. We talked about the questions on offensive line, so you got him, Isaiah Walker, and I think it's Richie Leonard too, right, Jackie? The 3. So you got 3 true freshman offensive linemen that are going to be early enrollees. Braun's already practiced in bowl practice, a couple practices there, already getting his feet wet there. So we talked about the questions on the offensive line. Where you're getting 3 true freshman offensive linemen that are going to be able to go through the strength and conditioning program, go through spring practice, and maybe are key cogs along that offensive line in the spring. So, Mark, you brought up the topic of early enrollees. I'm a big fan of getting your offensive line in as soon as possible, because that's the position I think that takes the biggest transformation in college football. Going from high school, going to college, get those guys in the weight room, going ahead and getting their bodies used to it, and the quarterback position as well. Anthony Richardson coming in, took part in bowl practices as well back in December, and is an early enrollee, will take part in spring as well. So, getting your quarterback and getting your offensive line in spring practice, I don't think can be overstated at all. I think they need all the reps, all the weightlifting that they can get to make that transformation from high school to college football.
Yeah, just look at Ethan White. Just look at Ethan White and what he did when he came at spring. He lost, what was it, 50 pounds?
Somewhere, yeah.
And not only just losing the weight, he was able to, adjust and get to know the offense. And he was starting by after the South Carolina game is when he came on, because of a situation where Chris Fleisches had blisters on his feet. Then Vandy was his actual first true start. So this is a guy who was a 3-star recruit that no one was talking about, came in at spring, worked with Nick Savage, lost all the weight, made sure to put in the extra work, and look, he was starting midway through the season. So I think you can't understate how important it is to grab those O-linemen in so early.
So in regards to the quarterback situation, obviously Emory Jones hit campus with a lot of fanfare. Kyle Trask hit campus with no fanfare at that point, not even starting for his high school team. But here we are with Kyle Trask proving to be the better quarterback selection than Felipe Franks, and obviously inherited the job because of injury against Kentucky. Is it just set in stone that Jones will back up Trask, or is there a battle here?
If you want to ask the fan base, Mark, there's a lot of the fan base that wants Emory Jones out there, no matter what Kyle Trask did last year, no matter how well he played,
really?
No matter, yes, believe it or not, there are. I'm sure Jackie has seen it too. There's there's a Kyle Trask hive and an Emory Jones hive. That's how it's labeled on Twitter. There, and look, I get it. Jackie and I have said multiple times, especially talking about with Anthony Richardson, we know Dan Mullen's look of a quarterback, where the ceiling of the offense will look its best. It is with a dual threat quarterback, but that doesn't mean that's the best option right now. And to me, that's still Kyle Trask for what he showed last year, the experience. Now, maybe I brought it up earlier, maybe Florida being so deep at receiver last year was, a big aid to Kyle Trask. And how does all those receivers leaving affect his play this year? But I believe, when the first snap of spring practice and the first snap of Eastern Washington, when Florida lines up in their first game of the season, it's going to be Kyle Trask being the starting quarterback. Now, Emory Jones, I think, will get a lot of playing time. I think we'll see him out there more. I think and I do get the wonder of out there, why doesn't Emory Jones maybe throw more when he's out there? Why does the offense change so much when he's the quarterback out there? Because look, when Kyle Trask went down versus Auburn, and it looked like an ugly injury, and it looked like just the quick knee-jerk reaction was that doesn't look good. He'll be out for a while. Emory Jones comes out there and leads Florida. I think he passed the ball 4 times on that drive, I believe. If I go back and think 4 to 6 times, somewhere around there, and looked good passing the ball, led Florida to it was a close game. Florida kicked the field goal that drive that ended up being a pretty important score in a close game. Emory Jones was out there throwing the ball, and it goes to Baton Rouge, and you had the quarterback rotation, and that was the best the quarterback rotation had looked all year, is when Florida went to Baton Rouge and played LSU. But then after that, it just seemed the offense was very predictable. Florida crossed the 30-yard line. Here come Emory Jones, 2 or 3 runs, and here comes Kyle Trask back out there. It seemed to mess with Kyle Trask rhythm when Emory Jones would be put out there, and the offense became kind of predictable when Emory Jones was out there. So I do get the wonder. I do get the angst a little bit of why the offense changes so much when Emory Jones wants you to let it run wide open. And I get the ceiling of the offense will be ultimately better with a dual threat quarterback, but right now, I still see Kyle Trask as just a hair above better option than what Emory Jones has still got to learn the playbook a bit more. He's out there, he's behind center, and he's still having to look to the sideline, get the sign from the coaching staff before the play can be changed and all that. And I know that's a point of the offense that's holding him back just a bit.
Yeah, I agree with everything that was just said. I think I know the Emory Jones hive is going to kill me, and I know I'm going to hear a lot about this, but I'm still on the Kyle Trask train. I think Kyle Trask will be your starter. Now, Dan Mullen will never say that he has a starter at quarterback because that's just not his style. Everyone's competing in every position. In the depth chart, you're probably going to still see that, or that we saw throughout most of the season last year, even when Kyle Trask was the starter. Now, I think what we're going to see in the spring is we're probably going to see Emory Jones more involved. We're going to see maybe a little bit more of the playbook with him. We saw that a little bit more towards the end of last season where we saw Emory Jones kind of do a little bit more with the ball. And I think we're going to see that in the spring, and we're going to see that in the fall. I think the 2 quarterback system is going to be utilized a lot more this time. Now, because, when my son is napping for 3 hours, I have no life, guys. I actually went play-by-play last year in the 2 quarterback system up until just before the Florida State game. And I broke down, does Emory Jones coming in really change the run game? After I broke down every single play, Florida only averages a yard extra on the ground when Emory Jones is in. So that's not a big difference. And obviously, if the play calling might be a little bit different, but that's only the change with Emory Jones under center and with Kyle Trask under center. That's factoring a lot of different stuff. Well, I did a lot of math, which hurt my head, but I did a lot of math in that. Now, the other thing I did notice is what David mentioned is that they do lose any sort of momentum. When I counted, it was like 45% of Florida's turnovers happened when there was a quarterback change, or they also went 3 and outs in those circumstances. All that happened during a quarterback change. So there was a momentum shift when that happened. If it was Kyle Trask coming in for Emory Jones, or if it's Emory Jones coming to Kyle Trask, it kind of happened both ways. Now, one of the few games that it worked perfectly was LSU. And I feel like because it was more scripted, when you looked at that game, you saw that there was less turnovers, less 3 and outs when that happened. That's when Dan Mullen's 2 quarterback system really, really showcased itself. And we saw that towards the end of the season too, when it looked a little bit more scripted. When Dan Mullen he says in the press conference, he does it with feeling, it didn't really work out for him. So I think when the 2 quarterback system is scripted, I think it will be beneficial for Florida. And especially with Emory Jones, learning the playbook a little bit more. So I can see that sort of 2 quarterback system kind of being developed towards this year. And I think spring is a good chance for us to get a little bit of a glimpse of it. I'm not expecting Dan Mullen to kind of rip open the playbook here. So during the spring, that's not the type of coach he is. But we're going to see probably a little bit more of that and see how far Emory Jones has, kind of come. And I'm hoping he's gained a little bit more weight too. He lost a little bit during the season last year. I hope he adds a little bit more muscle because that's the one thing that I've always looked at Emory Jones, and I feel like he needs to add a little bit more muscle in his legs. So maybe that's something that, they focused on. Because I know during the season last year, he was saying he wanted to add more weight, but because of practice and just the situation, he did lose a little bit of weight during last season. So I know that was a focal point of the staff at Emory Jones this off season, was to gain muscle weight. So that's something that we're also going to be watching for when spring starts.
Okay, so I want to get this straight. Again, having no life is something I can relate to, Jackie, because I'm grinding down ridiculous college football stats as well. I just went through the preseason rankings and the postseason rankings and made a comparison for the entire decade. So that's the kind of stuff I'm doing, so I can relate. So what I'm hearing is that a higher percentage of turnovers and 3 and outs happen when there's a change at quarterback. Now, is that during that particular drive or the next drive after?
No, it's during that particular drive. So like if a quarterback starts and ends on a drive, there's not a big a problem. It's when it actually happens in the middle of a drive. Some cases we've noticed, I can't remember exactly the game, but I remember Kyle Trask was finally moving the offense and he had 2 or 3 really good throws. He got a first down. Emory Jones came in, and in 3 plays later, they had to punt the ball. So that's a situation. It's in the middle of the drive. It's not like, honestly, if a quarterback starts and ends the drive, it often was fine. It was when right in the middle of the drive and there was a change of quarterbacks. That's when a lot of the problems happen, apart from LSU. because seemed like to be a pattern. It seemed like it was it seemed like a ballet. It was like one person gets off stage, the other person comes in, and they knew what was going to happen. Everything was flowing correctly. Everyone knew their jobs. But sometimes when you look back at some of those games, when there's a quarterback change, there's a little bit of hesitation or a little bit of shuffling among the players. I don't know. So it wasn't as crisp. So I think that was the issue with some of those games.
And I think one of the issues is certainly pointed out by Captain Trips here is that Emory Jones just simply needs to eat more vegetables. So that's something I don't know that you two have hit on in your analysis. I tout you as being two of the best, but I think you've missed on that, unfortunately.
Maybe I should use that for my son so he can eat his broccoli for dinner.
Yes.
Florida's got a good nutrition center, so we'll see.
Yeah.
So I heard David mention the amazing, huge matchup against Eastern Washington coming up on September 5th. And I know, David, I believe I know where he is on this concerning scheduling. So we'll hit on the 2020 schedule next. And I believe Florida, I will make a defense for Florida and most of their brethren in the SEC Eastern Division that have rivalries with ACC opponents, which they play the final weekend of the season. So if you're Georgia, Florida, et cetera, on down the line, and certainly South Carolina, that hasn't had the best position in the world, having to take on Clemson the final game of the season for the past zillion years, but especially the last 5, is that you automatically have that Power 5 game on your schedule. So you either are going to present your fan base with a very boring schedule because you're going to schedule the FCS and the MAC and the Mountain West or whoever to fill out the other 3 spots, and you're going to play your Florida State like everybody expects you to, or you're going to add a second Power 5 game, and you're automatically going to be playing, if you pair Florida State with Michigan, you suddenly go into the realm of having one of the 5 to 10 most difficult non-conference schedules in the country. If Florida State's Florida State, which they haven't been for the past 2 years. So your feelings, David, we'll start with you in regards to the 2020 schedule. And I see that there's a bit of a lighter touch from the SEC Western Division. Obviously, LSU's always on the schedule, but the rotation comes up on Ole Miss, so it's not in Alabama or Auburn or somebody of that, Texas A&M, as it has been in the past few years. Just your thoughts about the 2020 schedule, but more so the Florida approach to scheduling and what you would like to see.
I'll start with that second part first, Mark, just because it's kind of been brought up recently. Florida is expanding their out-of-conference schedule. They have a lot of Pac-12 schools coming up within the next decade. They announced Utah. They've announced Cal. They've announced Arizona State. They're playing Texas as well coming up in the next decade or so. Cal, Utah, Arizona State, Texas. They're playing Miami is on the schedule again too. USF in the coming years. So Florida is making that schedule a little tougher when you look at the out of conference opponents that are coming up. So I honestly, for me, I can't wait for Florida, Texas. That's just one of those matchups I've been waiting to see for years now. Two power big time programs in the 2 biggest football states in the country going head to head. That game, or a game like that, should have happened more in the past. But come back here to 2020. Look, you look at the whole big picture of Florida in 2020. And I think the schedule is a big part of why Florida is picked to go on some kind of run. As you mentioned, there's no big out-of-conference opponent in addition to Florida State. And Florida State's down this year. And then you're catching Georgia and LSU with coaching staff changes and losing so much to the draft. And Georgia replacing 3-4 offensive linemen, replacing DeAndre Swift, replacing Jake Fromm. Yes, they've recruited so well, but some coaching changes are going along there as well. So you're catching Georgia and LSU, Alabama, if you play them as well. All those teams are losing their quarterbacks that have carried those teams the last couple of years as well. And looking at just Florida schedule, you mentioned you draw Ole Miss out of the West. LSU, with everything they lose, they're the opponent as well from the West. So yeah, the schedule lines up for Florida to really make a run this year with an improved team and an easier schedule. Look, you look at the schedule the last 4 or 5 years for Florida. Florida gets by Kentucky early on because Kentucky has been that team that has just been giving Florida for the last 4 or 5 years everything they can handle. Beat Florida 2 years in the swamp, 2 years ago in the swamp to end a 31-year streak to the Gators there. So kind of maybe a little bit of revenge factor there for Mullen, his first loss there as a Gator head coach 2 years ago. But Florida gets by that Kentucky game early on, then it is kind of smooth sailing. If history is any indication, it is smooth sailing till you get to that LSU game, and then you get past that, and it's all, look, the last couple of years, Dan Mullen's first 2 years, just all come down to the game down here in Jacksonville. It probably will again anyway. But Georgia's got to play Alabama and Auburn this coming up year. And Florida, lucky enough, gets to pull Ole Miss and LSU. So you compare schedules as well, not just Florida's schedule, just looking at who Florida has to play. You compare schedules, and Georgia has to play Alabama in week 3. Then they have to play Auburn just a few weeks later. That game's been moved up to October now. It does get easier for Florida in relation to what Georgia has to play as well. So, Florida, in a way, I don't want to think like this from a Gator side, but Florida could lose in Jacksonville, and with Georgia's schedule, still end up in Atlanta somehow. But the disclaimer there is Florida's never been in Atlanta when losing to Georgia. So that's how important that game is. Florida's never been to the SEC championship game, would have lost to Georgia on the schedule. So, if that game comes down to, Florida, Georgia, and Jacksonville, the Gators have to win that game.
Yeah, when I look at this schedule, honestly, Dan Mullen couldn't have picked it better for the Gators this year, honestly, because when you think of all the losses they've had as far as, experienced players, when you lose all those wide receivers that they lost, when you lost some of those guys on defense that they've lost, having a schedule like this is perfect for them to really kind of get these guys experience and work towards those big games like in LSU and Georgia and really help this team kind of develop. Honestly, I look at the schedule and I would be shocked if they weren't in contention for the SEC East, and kind of following what David said, Georgia's schedule is the complete opposite. They're going to have a harder time, and they're going to have to adjust to new players in key positions. So you're going to have to ask yourself, is Kirby Smart a better coach than Dan Mullen? I think that's the question that people are going to be asking for right now, because yes, Smart, might be a guy that recruited well, but have we seen him develop players yet? We've seen Mullen develop players that shouldn't have been developed the way they have. We've seen him turn 3-star players into good players. We've seen him, Kyle Trask, he was a 2-star. No one cared about him. Look at him. He, led him to 11 wins in New York Six Bowl. So I think this schedule is ideal for Florida right now. I'm not saying that it's going to be a cupcake, because we all watch games. We all understand that, certain games like Kentucky can go either way. Sometimes, there really is one DB missing an assignment, and that's how Florida was able to win. Last year, when we looked at that Kentucky game, Florida managed to get out of that game. And I still, to this day, still don't know how they managed to sneak a win out of that game. It was a little bit of Trask magic that got them out of that game. The game that I'm interested in seeing is at Tennessee. Tennessee, I'm not going to say they're back, but Pruitt has done a good job of recruiting the parts that he needs as well. Not to the level of Dan Mullen, but I think I'm not going to pick if you had the gun to my head right now, I'll still pick Florida, but that'll be an interesting game to watch to see how far Tennessee has really come in the last few years. Because I remember 2 years ago at Tennessee, it was an embarrassment for the Vols. So I want to, that's a game where you go, it's on the road. It's the first really true test on the road for them in the season. That'll be an interesting game. But again, LSU is October 10th. That's the game that I've circled already. That's the first time. And LSU loses a lot of their players. And the guy that was really leading the charge on the offense, Brady, is gone. What's going to happen to that offense? What's the offense going to look like? So this is a really good schedule for them. But I am liking what Scott Strickland is doing as far as the schedule. I don't like having cupcakes to cover. It's not fun to cover and watch the game. So it's nice to have that big competitive games. But, when I look at Florida, Texas, that's going to be 2030, I think. So I'm going to have to wait a long time for that Florida, Texas game. Although that's a game that I want to watch. My son's going to be in high school. That's how far away this is. But I do like the trend that a lot of college teams are doing right now. And we see how that affects the college playoffs. It's very, very important that you schedule some tough opponents, because just look at where Florida ended up in the last college playoff rankings. Honestly, they shouldn't have been as low, in my opinion anyways, than they were. But because of, certain Big Ten teams were able to get games and higher ranked opponents, not to the fault of Florida, because obviously Florida couldn't fix their SEC schedule, but because they had 2 teams on there that were not Power 5 teams, so they were kind of ranked a little bit lower. So I think that's the way the college football playoff is now headed. If they don't expand it, I know a lot of people don't like the expansion. I think you need to have a stronger schedule because you're trying to compete with other conferences, and sometimes the other conferences do have stronger schedules at that point. They have stronger teams, like the Big Ten had a lot of teams ranked pretty high, and I think that's the problem, especially when Florida, when you look at the SEC East last year, wasn't as tough as far as rankings. And plus Miami didn't do any favors for them either. Miami was horrible and losing a lot of games last year, and that didn't help Florida's power ranking as well. So I think when you're building your schedule now, you're trying to also think ahead and say, hopefully in 2030, Texas is doing well in the top 10, top 5 team, because they'll help me out in the college football playoffs. But then maybe, I don't know, we probably expanded the college football players or doing something else. I don't know. It's a long time from now. But I think that's the thought process now when you're doing scheduling, is how can this not hurt my team as far as college football playoffs?
For an SEC schedule, it's not too bad, as David notes, with Ole Miss on the rotation from the SEC Western Division. LSU.
Speaking of Ole Miss there, Mark, though, but
yep.
Jackie can speak this up. Florida's recent history at Ole Miss is not really too good. And Lane Kiffin there, it's a game. Honestly, it doesn't worry me on the surface, but when you go back and look at Florida's history and traveling to Oxford, it's not too kind for the Gators.
And actually, they just lost another battle tonight. Mark Britt. Florida. So Lane Kiffin just got one over Dan Mullen. But can we talk about the press conferences leading up to that game? I am excited about Lane Kiffin and Dan Mullen talking to each other. I want to see if you know how Dan Mullen usually jokes about the spring game numbers and all that. I'm already waiting for the press conference leading up to that game.
Lane Kiffin and Mike Leach in the same division.
Yeah.
So they might be the two
same state,
but in the same state. Yeah. If it was only, I'm going to date myself. 20 years ago, I would have been down there covering both of them.
That's right.
As I was at the time when it was Jackie Sherrill and Tommy Tupperville. All right. Our Florida Gators Live has been a great success thanks to these two. Jackie Franchuli from Rivals Gators Territory, and of course, David Waters from Gators Breakdown. Please like, comment, share the videos, and subscribe right here at Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. We got Ohio State Talk coming up tomorrow at noon Eastern time. You two made this a tremendous success. Thank you so much for jumping on board and giving us an hour plus of your time to talk Florida football.
Yeah, let's do it again.